I have learned to be content in whatever circumstances I find myself. How many people here in this room can say this? Man, I got to tell you guys, I can't say that. Because sometimes my circumstances, everything lines up and I'm happy for a moment, right? You know, when the health is good and the bills are paid and everybody's healthy and everything's good, there's sometimes I'm content. Everything's good because all my circumstances are good. Here's what Paul is saying. Here's what I want to drive home with you tonight in your identity. He says, I have learned to be content, whatever my circumstances are. Let's look at what the next verse says. Verse 12, for I know both how to make do with what? Little, like hardly anything. And I know how to make do with a lot. There's been times in his life when he had plenty of extra. In any and all circumstances, what does he say? I have learned the secret of what? Being content. Whether I am well fed or hungry. Now, I don't think many of us as Americans have really missed many meals. We use the phrase, I'm starving, but I don't know that any of us have ever really had that actually happen. He says, I've learned the secret of being content. Don't you want to know the secret of being content? Because contentment drives a whole lot of issues in our life, doesn't it? I've learned the secret of being content, whether well-fed or hungry, whether in abundance or in need. And then we get to verse 13, which I hope you'll understand in a different way than it's probably on a lot of your walls at home or it's on your screensaver. But I hope you understand the context. He says, I am able to do all things through him who strengthens me. So what is all things he's talking about being able to do through Christ who strengthens me? To win the Olympics? Man, I can become a millionaire. I can be the big CEO. Nothing wrong with those things if that's what happens in your life, but that's not what he's referring to. He's referring to being content in which circumstances? How many? Any circumstance. So sometimes when things are really good, we're not content either. Have you ever heard, I've lost track in my 51 years of how many times I've heard great musicians, athletes, business people that were like at the top of their game. Like they were making millions, whether it was in professional sports or in business or investors or singers, musicians. And when they get to the top and they've got it all and they've got all the trophies and all the money, what do they say? Is this all there is? It still didn't satisfy. And so what Paul is saying is, I found that contentment is not in whether I've got a whole lot of food in the fridge or no food in the fridge, whether I've got a pile of money in the bank or I'm trying to figure out how to scrape together to get enough to pay rent this month. He says, I've learned the secret to contentment. I don't say this very often, but if I were to translate that verse for better English for how it applies in context, and I've got some backing on this, I've wrestled with this for a few years, so I'm not saying this flippantly. If I were to translate verse 13, while it is translated correctly, don't misunderstand me, I think I would change one word in verse 13 to help us understand it better. Philippians 4:13, I am able to endure all things through Christ who strengthens me. Doesn't that change the perspective? Because isn't that what he's talking about in the previous verses? Whether I've got a lot or a little, I may not have anything, but I'm learning the secret. What did he say? He's learning it. Did that mean he'd accomplished it or had mastered it? Man, I thank the Lord that Paul put that word in there. I've learned. Paul didn't get it all at once. I've learned. We're learning. I'm learning. I'm learning this lesson with you guys in real time, and part of this is because I wrestle with my own insecurities. I wrestle with my own feelings of inadequacy, and if I measure up, or if I'm good enough, or if I'm going to be successful. Believe me, I'm no different than you. And so he says, I've learned. It took time. I've learned. I've learned the secret of being content. Wouldn't that be a good hook for somebody for the gospel and a good conversation? Hey, would you like to know the secret to contentment? That ought to make some people lean in, right? What? Solomon learned the hard way. Solomon had everything and realized nothing brought satisfaction. With all the wives, with all the wine, with all the wealth, with all the horses, with everything. Man, he was probably, even in today's standards, he probably had more kind of collectively than Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos or all those guys. He probably had more than them from that day to this day. It was so just ludicrous how much wealth he had. And he realized from Ecclesiastes, it was all just, anybody remember what that word in Ecclesiastes is? Everybody knows? Yeah, I want to get to that word. Most people translate vanity. Vanity of vanities, everything is vanity. So when we think of vanities, we think of stuff as vain, as it has no meaning. But Aaron's word that he said was actually a little more appropriate from the Hebrew. And it says, the word literally in Hebrew, to give you a little Hebrew lesson, the word was hevel. And here's what hevel means, Hevel, if you try to use English letters. But the word hevel means this. It means a passing vapor or a mist, just a wisp of smoke. We've all been around a campfire. And when you're sitting around a campfire, if there is a fire, you see a wisp of smoke go up. How long do you pay attention to that? Maybe a second. Oh, yeah, there's a wisp of smoke. And it does. And he says that's what everything in this world is. It's just hevel. It's just a wisp of smoke. It's a vapor. It's a mist. It's here in a moment and gone in a moment. So that was the point of Ecclesiastes. It sounds disheartening. I've actually come to love Ecclesiastes the older I've gotten. When I first started reading Ecclesiastes, I thought it was like Job. I'm like, man, this is kind of disconcerting. I don't know if I like this book. But now as I'm getting older, I've come to love Ecclesiastes, and it's reminding me everything else is hevel. It's all just a vapor. It's a mist. Here a moment, gone the next moment. And so Paul said, I've learned the secret to contentment. I can do all things. I can endure all things through Christ. Christ is the one who gives me strength. And that's actually an understatement because he's the one who gave him life. Because Paul teaches us about our new life in Christ.